Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are on to journal collection number 31, dating from the year 1840. It begins with a quotation from Dante, which is not translated, unfortunately, and per my rules for reading all of these journals, if the editor/annotator has not translated it into the English language, I will not be going on Google Translate or whatever to be typing in every single one of these because Emerson drops a lot of anonymous, not in this case, but in most cases, anonymous little quotations in various languages. And if it's often not even sure who it is the person that he's quoting. So it's not very helpful and it would really slow down the process of reading. So once again, I feel it necessary to at least say that so somebody listening is not confused why I'm saying there's a quote by Dante and not reading it. This one is 3 lines long and it's from Il Paradiso. That's all I can say about it. And with that said, I will go ahead and start our first entry from January 1840. Guy wished all his friends dead on very slight occasion. Guy wished all his friends dead on very slight occasion. Whoever was privy to one of his gaucheries had the honor of this Stygian optation. Had Jove heard all his prayers, the planet would soon have been unpeopled. At last it occurred to Guy that instead of wringing his hecatomb of friends' necks every morning, he would dine better if he gave as much life as he now took. He found to his astonishment the embryos of 1,000 friends hid under his own heart, and that for every offence he gave, and for every great choice he made, suddenly from afar a noble stranger knocked at his street gate. What is the state? The hero is the state. The soul should legislate, postponing still the measure to the man. One sage outweighs all China and Japan. No man may have any measure which is to be preferred a moment to the man itself. The state may avail as long as it can be treated as wise man. After that, stop, coax it not, lie not unto it nor for it. The influence of character, that is the theocracy. It is never nothing, it is never omnipotent, but in the inspired moments of each people prevails. In each of our own towns and cities there are periods when the influence of genius predominates for a season over a circle of minds. The power of Swedenborg at this moment is an impure theocracy. The influence of a preacher, of a book, of a character of singular worth exerts this magnetism. The recipients feel that they do not so much borrow the light as find the same light in their breast which flames so high from this inspired brother. The effect of Jesus on men after an immense deduction is made for false reception of all kinds, is an impure theocracy. But character is scarcely allowed any rule at all. Everything governs but that. It is a force not yet known. Rarely a young man, a young woman reckoned fastidious and whimsical, goes alone, doth somewhat or forbears somewhat in contradiction to all custom out of private motions, hath insuperable reluctances which are not to be expressed, or invincible urgencies to particular action. But this is a spirit which does not love much the old, hard people, but rather haunts childhood and tender youth. There is a great deal of theocracy in a blush. Nothing is incredible of this power. Its feeblest motion is a counterbalance for mightiest monarchies. I have read Plato's dialogue, The Politician and Cousin. He seems to me as before to owe his fame to the fact that he is a great average man. It is pedantry to estimate nations by the census or the geographical extent by coin or antiquity. We compromise ourselves when we depart from necessary standards, that is, from their importance to the mind of the period. If Russia is a scarecrow, that fact at least tells somewhat of them whom it scares. If England, France, and Italy draw the steps of all travelers, that fact characterizes at least the traveler. But to measure miles and count hands as brute indicates hopeless formalism. We want one miracle by way of evidence, this namely that a mind not profound should become profound. The teaching which has that miracle to show will go round the world. Man of genius belongs to monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy equally. The scholar verifies the Duke of Ormond's experience, who went to court because there only he could see his equals, and stayed away because there he could see a superior. Genius avails always itself of a fact as language for its abstractions. The capital crime with which the Church stands charged is its poverty. Truth is always rich, all related, all explaining. But our Church is a little byway, an eddy, a nook, wherein you hear some words and notions you will hear of nowhere else, and which will not explain to the handcart man his cart, nor to me my pen and ink, my sex, my form and face. Then there is a long quotation from Balzac's Le Livre Mystique, untranslated. February 3rd. Every man passes his life in the search after friendship, and here is the letter which he writes to each candidate for his love. And the footnote says that what follows is the essay on friendship, which of course I've already read and will not read in this setting. Character plus sensibility. They were self-centered. Willa was not. He went to them more than was due. He would be poised, and they should pass and repass. Yet was this mobility of his only superficial, and in manners the flintiest brow in the hall did not surmount a purpose as fast as his to its natural objects, or one as impatient of a false position. He was a rocking stone, always tilting but never overthrown. Editor's note: here follows the dialogue between Zenos and Iole, which occurs in Character, Essays, 2nd Series, page 90. February 19th. I closed last Wednesday, 12th instant, my course of lectures in Boston on The Present Age, which were read on 10 consecutive Wednesday evenings, except Christmas evening. 1. Introductory, 4th of December. 2. Literature. 3. Literature. 4. Politics. 5. Private life. 6. Reforms. 7. Religion. 8. Ethics. 9. Education. 10. Tendencies. I judge from the account rendered me by the seller of tickets, added to an account of my own distribution of tickets to my friends, that the average audience at a lecture consisted of about 400 persons. 256 course tickets were sold, and 305 evening tickets or passes. I distributed about 110 to 120 course tickets. These lectures give me little pleasure. I have not done what I hoped when I said I will try it once more. I have not once transcended the coldest self-possession. I said I will agitate others, being agitated myself. I dared to hope for ecstasy and eloquence. A new theater, a new art, I said, is mine. Let us see if philosophy, if ethics, if chiromancy, if the discovery of the divine in the house and the barn, in all works and all plays, cannot make the cheek blush, the lip quiver, and the tear start. I will not waste myself. On the strength of things I will be born, and if folly, custom, convention, and phlegm cannot be made to hear our sharp artillery. Alas, alas, I have not the recollection of one strong moment. A cold, mechanical preparation for a delivery as decorous. Fine things, pretty things, wise things, but no arrows, no axes, no nectar, no growling, no transpiercing, no loving, no enchantment. And why? I seem to lack constitutional vigor to attempt each topic as I ought. I ought to seek to lay myself out utterly, large, enormous, prodigal, upon the subject of the week. But a hateful experience has taught me that I can only expend, say, 21 hours on each lecture, if I would also be ready and able for the next. Of course, I spend myself prudently. I economize, I cheapen, whereof nothing grand ever grew. Could I spend 60 hours on each, or what is better, had I such energy that I could rally the lights and mights of 60 hours into 20, I should hate myself less, I should help my friend. I ought to be equal to every relation. I saw a maiden the other day, dressed so prettily and fancily that she gave the eye the same sort of pleasure that a gem does, a fine opal or the colored stones. When I remember what fairy pleasure I found in some cornelians or agates which I saw for an hour when a very little boy, I think none but children and savages enjoy gems. I wrote S. G. Ward. I see persons whom I think the world would be richer for losing, and I see persons whose existence makes the world rich. But blessed be the eternal power, for those whom my lawless fancy even cannot strip of beauty, and who never for a moment seem to me profane. How much we augur in seeing an unusual natural phenomenon, as for instance an electric spark. Already we are groping for its ethics. What absence of all sadness in the drops of the snowbank! What nimble gigantic creatures our thoughts are! What saurians, what Pleithria these! Oh, and then there's two Greek words. Rich leopard-skinned man, who art a palace of sweet sounds and sights, and carriest in thy brain the city of God, in thy cunning senses the morning and the night, the unfathomable galaxy and the realms of right and wrong. Rich past, one word of the old book is so penetrating to my imagination. What shall I say of thy world of old words and virtues and crucifixions and gifts to men? And yet, poor and thoughtless though today is, I count this instinct sacred which bids me slight thy admirable wealth, even in my starving poverty, as a testimony to my faith in my more admirable possibilities. February 21st. Self-respect is demanded of us by the most general considerations. We stand here for nature and humanity. They bid us make them comely and honorable. The aim of art is always at somewhat better than nature, but the work of art is always inferior to nature. The book only characterizes the reader. Is Shakespeare the delight of the 19th century? That fact shows whereabouts we are in the ecliptic of the world. Ah, that I could reach with my words the force of that rhetoric of things in which the divine mind is conveyed to me day by day in what I call my life, a loaf of bread, an errand to the town, a temperate man, an industrious man. Providence, March 28th. Send Very's poems to Carlyle and Wordsworth. Providence, March 30th. When the materialist represents mind as the result of body, and at the perishing of body deceasing, he tells us that this is true, though not so satisfactory to our pride. This last remark is a fatal concession. Nature is always true, there is no lie, no betrayal in it, and yet it seems in all the individuals there arises this feeling, on hearing his statement, that it is less satisfactory to our pride than something else. In other words, all the individuals feel, here is some wrong, some crack. Something else is desirable than that you say is done. Something else is best. Then surely something else must be true. Nature is in continual flux. Everybody is an hourly mercury of the state of its soul. So much for phrenology and physiognomy. Some men write better than they speak. Of such I had rather see the manuscript than see the man. For what he speaks he says to me, but what he writes he says to God. I said to C.S., the difference between persons is not wisdom, but in knack. April. By confession we help each other, by clean shrift and not by dictation. I like manners and their aristocracy better than the morgue of wealth. It is a gay chivalry, a merit, and indicates certainly the presence of a sense of beauty. I am always a fool to these mannered men at the first encounter. The Southerner holds me at arm's length. He will not let me measure him, and after 24 hours my opinion shall still not be worth the telling. Such a cloak is his politesse. And yet, O stately friend, do not presume on this gay privilege of thine. Yonder simple countryman, on whom you have yet bestowed no smile, strikes down all your glittering and serried points with a wave of his hand, and overawes you, as does some grave friar a circle of armed barons. He oversteps with a free stride all your spaces marked with ribbons and etiquette, for he does not respect them. He is dignified by a higher thought, vis-a-vis by a humanity which slights all this, and overstands it, as a sane man and insane. Death in a novel or a poem is but the mechanical sublime. Manage it how you will. Lay any emphasis on it, and it only betrays the poverty of the writer. The feeblest action, the faintest thought must always be superior to the most imposing death in fable. Ah, my poor countryman, Yankees and dollars have such inextricable association that the words ought to rhyme. In New York, in Boston, in Providence, you cannot pass two men in the street without the word escaping them in the very moment of encounter. Dollars, 2.5%, 3%. April 7th. What does that fact signify that nobody in this country can draw a hand except Austin? Asserted by Mr. Cole, I think. At Providence I was made very sensible of the desire of all open minds for religious teaching. The young men and several good women freely expressed to me their wish for more light, their sympathy in whatever promised a better life. They inquired about the new journal of next July. I was compelled to tell them that the aims of that paper were rather literary than psychological or religious. But the inquiry and the tone of these inquirers showed plainly what one may easily see in Boston and Cambridge and the villages also, that what men want is a religion. The railroad makes a man a chattel, transports him by the box and the ton. He waits on it. He feels that he pays a high price for his speed in this compromise of all his will. I think the man who walks looks down on us who ride. I see with great pleasure this growing inclination in all persons who aim to speak the truth for manual labor and the farm. In all my lectures I have taught one doctrine, namely the infinitude of the private man. This the people accept readily enough, and even with loud commendation, as long as I call the lecture art, or politics, or literature, or the household. But the moment I call it religion, they are shocked, though it be only the application of the same truth which they receive everywhere else to a new class of facts. The case of the menaced and insulted monarch is not quite aloof from our own experience. We have tasted that cup too. For see this wide society in which we walk of laboring men. We allow ourselves to be served by them. We pay them money, and then turn our backs on them. April 9th. We walked this afternoon to Edmund Hosmer's in Walden Pond. The south wind blew and filled with bland and warm light the dry sunny woods. The last year's leaves flew like birds through the air. As I sat on the bank of the drop or God's pond and saw the amplitude of the little water, what space, what verge the little scudding fleets of ripples found to scatter and spread from side to side, and take so much time to cross the pond, and saw how the water seemed made for the wind, and the wind for the water, dear playfellows for each other. I said to my companion, I declare this world is so beautiful that I can hardly believe it exists. At Walden Pond the waves were larger, and the whole lake in pretty uproar. Jones Very said, See how each wave rises in the midst of an original force at the same time that it partakes the general movement. He said that he went to Cambridge and found his brother reading Livy. I asked him if the Romans were masters of the world. My brother said they had been. I told him they were still. Then I went into the room of a senior who lived opposite and found him writing a theme. I asked him what was his subject, and he said Cicero's vanity. I asked him if the Romans were masters of the world. He replied they had been. I told him they were still. This was in the garret of Mr. Ware's house. Then I went down into Mr. Ware's study and found him reading Bishop Butler and I asked him if the Romans were masters of the world. He said they had been. I told him they were still. Very obvious is the one advantage which this singular man has attained unto that of bringing every man to true relations with him. No man would think of speaking falsely to him, but every man will face him, and what love of nature or what symbol of truth he has, he will certainly show him. But to most of us the society shows not its face and eye, but its side and its back. To stand in true relations with men in a false age is worth a fit of insanity, is it not? April 27th. My little boy says, "I want something to play with which I never saw before," and thus lives are already in his experience the proclamation of Xerxes, advertising a reward for a new pleasure. I tell him that the sun and moon are good playthings still, though they are very old. They are as good as new. So are eating and drinking, though rather dangerous toys, very good amusements, though old ones. So is water, which we wash and play with, but he is not persuaded by my eloquence. There seems a strange propensity to egotism in the mind of several eminent spiritualists whom I have known disproportion, a sad exaggeration which disables them from putting their act and word aloof from them, detaching it, and seeing it as a pitiful shriveled apple at its best, a disgrace to the tree and to nature. And this in souls of unquestionable power and greater nearness to the secret of God than others. It is sadly punished, too, and that speedily, inasmuch as this habit always leads men to humor it, to treat the patient tenderly, not roundly, and so shut him up gradually in a narrower selfism, and exclude from him the great world of God's cheerful, though fallible, men and women. I had rather be insulted whilst I am insultable. James Naylor, George Fox, Luther are eminent examples of it long ago. And now we have poets, critics, abolitionists, prophets, and philosophers infected with the same elephantiasis. There is an important equivoque in our use of the word unconscious, a word which is much played upon in the psychology of the present day. We say that our virtue and genius are unconscious, that they are the influx of God, and the like. The objector replies that to represent the divine being as an unconscious somewhat is abhorrent, etc. But the unconsciousness we spake of was merely relative to us. We speak, we act, from we know not what higher principle, and we describe its circumambient quality by confessing the subjection of our perception to it. We cannot oversee it, not see at all its channels into us. But in saying this, we predicate nothing of its consciousness or unconsciousness in relation to itself. We see at once that we have no language subtle enough for distinctions of that inaccessible region. That air is too rare for the wings of words. We cannot say God is self-conscious or not self-conscious, for the moment we cast our eye on that dread nature we see that it is the wisdom of wisdom, the love of love, the power of power, and soars infinitely out of all definition and dazzles all inquest. True criticism is inexhaustible. Every new thought supersedes all foregone thought and makes a new light on the whole world. All spontaneous thought is irrespective of all else. It is for those who come after to find its relation to other thoughts. If there be need of a new journal, that need is its introduction. It wants no preface. It proceeds at once to its own ends, which it well knows and answers now for the first time. That consummated fitness is a triumphant apology. It will ignore all the old, long constituted public or publics which newspapers and magazines address. It ignores all newspapers and magazines. It is so real, so full of its own authentic aim, which it exists to attain, that it knows them not. Not seeing them to fill any place which this mind esteems real, it has no thought to waste on them. It speaks to a public of its own, a newborn class long already waiting. They, least of all, need from it any letters of recommendation. It is of course too confident in its tone to comprehend an objection, and so builds no outworks for possible defense against contingent enemies. It has the step of fate, and goes on existing like an oak or a river because it must. If the projected journal be what we anticipate, and if not, we should not care for it. It does not now know itself in the way of accustomed criticism. It cannot foretell in orderly proportions what it shall do. Its criticism is to be poetic, not the peeping, but the broad glance of the American man on the books and things of this hour. Its brow is not wrinkled with circumspection, but serene, cheerful, adoring. It has all things to say, and no less than all the world for its final audience. There are, no doubt, many dogs barking at the moon, and many owls hooting in this Saturday night of the world, but the fair moon knows nothing of either. April 30th. Waldo looks out today from my study window and says, "These are not the woods I like to look at." "And what woods would you like to look at?" "Those that I see from the window of the nursery." May 4th. Waldo says, "God is very glorious. He always says his prayers and never behaves naughty." May 6th. Yesterday were the clubs at Medford. Superlative. It is somewhat sad that a word of such sacred meaning as glory should now be the emptiest of all words, and scarcely in a lifetime shall we hear it used without disgust. In conversation, Alcott will meet no man who will take a superior tone. Let the other party say what he will, Alcott unerringly takes the highest moral ground and commands the other's position, and cannot be outgeneraled. And this because, whilst he lives in his moral perception, his sympathies with the present company are not troublesome to him, never embarrass for a moment his perception. He is cool, bland, urbane, yet with his eye fixed on the highest fact. With me it is not so. In all companies I sympathize too much. If they are ordinary and mean, I am. If the company were great, I should soar. In all mere mortal parties I take the contagion of their views and lose my own. I cannot outsee them, or correct, or raise them. As soon as they are gone, the muse returns. I see the facts as all cultivated men always have seen them, and am a great man alone. Every man supposes himself not to be fully understood or appreciated. Strange how hard it is for cultivated men to free themselves from the optical illusion by which a great man appears an institution. They know and have observed in particular instances that the demonstration of a strong will, of a vast thought, at once arrested the eyes and magnetized the wills of men, so that society and events became secondaries and satellites of a man, and the genesis of that man's thought is not now explored after the laws of thought, but externally in his parentage, in his country, climate, college, election, by his fellows, citizens, and the like, as we know is the tenor of vulgar biography. And yet, though familiar with this fact, the moment Jesus is mentioned, they forget their knowledge, and accept the apparatus of prophecy, miracle, positive, supernatural indication by name and place, and claim on his part to extraordinary outward relations. All these, which are the prismatic hues and lights which play around any wonderful genius, they regard as of an adamantine reality, and in the selectest society, where beauty, goodness, and the soul are named, these men talk of "preaching Christ," and of "Christ's being the ideal of man," etc., etc. We are halves. We see the past in memory, but do not see the future. They say that at times this hemisphere completes itself, and foresight becomes as perfect as aftersight. May 9th. Is it not pedantry to insist that every man should be a farmer as much as that he should be a lexicographer? Suppose the doctrine of the right estate of man finds him at sea, shall he therefore scrape together what dust and refuse he can find on deck, and dibble in a flower pot, or shall he learn to use the ropes, to stand at the wheel to a reef, a sail, and draw a fish out of the sea, and be a farmer of the sea? In like manner, if the doctrine of universal labor find him in the midst of books, whose use he understands, and whose use other men wish to learn of him, shall he cast away this his skill and usefulness to go bungle with hoe and harrow, with cows and swine which he understands not? Should he not rather farm his books well and lose no hour of beneficent activity in that place where he now is? The doctrine of the farm is merely this: where is the fertile earth? Where the farmer is. Where do books become great engines, but where the scholar is? May 10th. Self-trust. If you have no talent for scolding, do not scold. If none for explaining, do not explain. If none for giving parties, do not give parties, however graceful or needful these acts may appear in others. I said once that every one should read proudly, not too anxious to find himself in Aeschylus or in Spinoza, but quite ready to dismiss the book as an inadequate interpreter of his consciousness. I said again that the scholar must not fear the excess of influence of any author, but follow with heart and strength the master whom he loved, leaving father and mother, house and land behind him, and by the over-influence would abate, and the light of this would blend with the general day. Do these two statements clash? I think not. He is to give himself to that which draws him, because that is his own, and he is to refuse that which draws him not, because it draws him not. The age. The age is marked by, quote, an increasing tenderness for human life, end quote. If a man knows the law, he may settle himself in a shanty in the pine forest, and men will and must find their way to him as readily as if he lived in the city hall. I begin to dislike animal food. I had whimsies yesterday after dinner which disgusted me somewhat. The man will not be much better than the beast he eats. Conformity is the ape of harmony. I have supped with gods tonight. Shall I come under wooden roofs? As I walked on the hills, the great stars did not shine aloof, but they hurried down from their deep abodes and hemmed me in their glittering troop. All spontaneous thought is irrespective of all else. It is for those who come after to find its relation to other thoughts. The soul. I think whenever we are addressed greatly, we greet the brave speaker, and are by him instantly admonished how we ought to speak. It is the highest power of divine moments that they abolish even our contritions. Can we never extract this maggot of Europe out of the brains of our countrymen? Plato and Pythagoras may travel, for they carry the world with them, and are always at home, but our travelers are moths and danglers. Wordsworth has done as much as any living man to restore sanity to cultivated society. Beware when the great God lets loose a new thinker on this planet. But we impute the virtues to our friends, and afterwards worship the face and feature to which we ascribe these divine tenets. Labor with the hands that you may have animal spirits. Be not an opium eater. Cold water has no repentance. But do not let debt and the bondage of housekeeping fret you out of the knowledge of the value of house, husbandry, property. Suppose you have reformed, and live on grains and black birch bark and muddy water, that you may have leisure. Well, what then? What will you do with the long day? Think? What, all day? Do you not see that instantly taste and arithmetic and power will plan plantations and build summer houses and carve gods? We must have a basis for our delicate entertainments of poetry and philosophy and our handicraft. We must have an antagonism in the tough world for all the variety of our spiritual faculties, or they will not be born. In regard to this, Goethe, I have to add that a man as gifted as he should not leave the world as he found it. Yet how is the world better for Goethe? What load has he lifted from men or from women? There is Austria and England, the old and the new, full of old effete institutions and usages, full of men born old, and the question still incessantly asked by the young, What shall I do? With forlorn aspect. But let some strong Zeno, some nervous Epaminondas, Moses, or Isaiah come into our society, and see how he defies it, and enables us to brave it, to come out of it and remake it from the cornerstone. There is hardly a life in Plutarch that does not infuse a new courage and prowess into the youth, and make him gladder and bolder for his own work. May 17th. In architecture, height and mass have a wonderful effect because they suggest immediately a relation to the sphere on which the structure stands, and so to the gravitating system. The tower, which with such painful solidity soars like an arrow to heaven, apprises me in an unusual manner of that law of gravitation, by its truth, to which it can rear aloft into the atmosphere those dangerous masses of granite, and keep them there for ages as easily as if it were a feather or a scrap of down. Then, great mass, especially in height, has some appreciable proportion to the size of the globe, and so appears to us as a splinter of the orb itself. The earth is gay in these days with the blossoming of all fruit trees. An apple tree near at hand is a great awkward flower, but seen at some distance it gives a wonderful softness to the landscape. There are many things which teach that high lesson that success depends on the aim, not on the means. Look at the mark, not on your arrow. And herein is my hope for all reform in our vicious modes of living. Let a man direct his inquiry on details in attempting an amelioration, and he will be met at every step by unanswerable objections and insoluble difficulties. But let him propose to himself a grand aim, to live a prophet, a helper, a member of the morning and of nature, one whom the flowering tree and the summer wind and the sovereign stars shall recall to the remembrance of men, and be the newborn child of absolute love, a pure power, a calm and happy genius, through whom, as through a lens, the rays of the universe converge to the joy of the eye that seeth. And I think he shall be floated into his space of activity and happiness by might and mind sublime over all these rocks and shoals that now look insuperable. Fix his heart on magnificent life, and he need not know the economical methods. He shall be himself astonished at the great solution of the problem of means. Living has got to be too ponderous than that the poor spirit can drag any longer this unnecessary baggage train. Let us cut the traces. The bird and the fox can get their food and house without lies, and why not we? A great aim shall bring it, as if ravens brought it, the bread of love, apples, pomegranates, berries, and corn, not stolen from nature, not polluted nor polluting. There is this plea always considerable when it is said, let the bard, the priesthood, receive no contributions, but be rather tent makers and ploughmen as others are. Namely, that in the experience of all sedentary men, that degree of manual labor which is necessary for the maintenance of a family indisposes and disqualifies for intellectual exertion. Latent heat performs a great office in nature. Not less does latent joy in life. You may have your stock of well-being condensed into ecstasies, trances of good fortune and delight, preceded and followed by blank or painful weeks and months. Or you may have your joy spread over all the days in a bland, vague, uniform sense of power and hope. Yet is this figure of a stock of well-being only rhetorical, or rather relative to certain limitations. For the latent heat of an ounce of wood or stone is inexhaustible, and the power of happiness of any soul is not to be computed or drained. May 18th. Criticism must be transcendental, that is, must consider literature ephemeral, and easily entertain the supposition of its entire disappearance. In our ordinary states of mind, we deem not only letters in general, but most famous books parts of a pre-established harmony, fatal, unalterable, and do not go behind Dante and Shakespeare, much less behind Moses, Ezekiel, and St. John. But man is critic of all these also, and should treat the entire extant product of the human intellect as only one age, revisable, corrigible, reversible by him. We have more traditions than the most resolute skeptic has yet interrogated or even guessed. How few cosmogonies have we? A few have got a kind of classical character, and we let them stand for a world-builder is a rare man. And yet what ghosts and hollows, formless dream-gear these theories are! How crass and inapplicable! How little they explain! What a poor handful of facts in these plentiful universe they touch! Let me see. Moses, Hesiod, Egyptian lore of Isis and Osiris, Zoroaster, Menu. With these few rude poems or extracts from rude poems, the nations have been content when any clever boy, black or white, has anywhere interrupted the stupid uproar by a sharp question. Would any one please to tell me whence I came hither? To be sure, that question is contrary to the rules of good society in all countries. For society is always secondary, not primary, and delights in secondaries. It is gregarious and parasitic, and loves to lay its egg, like the caltrupule, in a nest which other birds have built, and to build no nest itself. Absolute truths, previous questions, primary natures, society loathes the sound of, in the name of, "Can you not as well say Christ as say truth?" It asks. Who are you, child, that you must needs ask so many questions? See what a vast procession of your uncles and aunts who never asked any. Can't you eat your dinner and read in the books? Besides, I hate conversation, it makes my head ache. But if the urchin has wild eyes, and can neither be coaxed nor chidden into silence, and cares not a pin for the Greeks and Romans, for art or antiquity, for Bible or government, for politics or money, and keeps knocking soundly all night at the gate, then at last the good world condescends to unroll for him these solemn scrolls as the reports of the commissioners from the east, from the south, from the north, and the west, to whom his question had been formerly referred. If the poor lad got no answer before, he has got none now. What birth do these famous books of Genesis reveal? Do they explain so much as the nest of a bluebird or the hum of a fly? Can they tell him the pedigree of the smallest effect? Can they detect the virtue of the feeblest cause? Can they give him the least hint of the history of the eyes he has worshipped, or disclose his relations to the summer brook and the waving corn? And yet every man is master of the whole fact, and shall one day find himself so. May 25th. In the Golden Age, men did not lay up property for their children, for the marriages were equal, and the children abler than their parents. In the Golden Age, men did not study the song of the bird by writing down, with Nuttall, the notes of awkward syllables, che, etc., but the chaste and simple hermit found himself intelligent of the song by the love in his own heart. Neither did they know too much of bird or beast, and peep after them, but treating them brotherly and greatly, they without pain saw through their being. In the Golden Age, a brave pleasure was not purchased too dearly, like a poet's day, by many leaden days, but every joy was embosomed in joys like a lupine in the woods. People wish to be settled. It is only as far as they are unsettled that there is any hope for them. You admire this tower of eternal granite defying the assault of ages, yet a little waving hand built this huge wall. Criticism is timid. When shall we dare to say only that is poetry which cleanses and mans me? Hate this childish haste to print and publish, for the hours of light come like days of judgment at last, and cast their glory backward, forward, above, below. Then, poor child, all the folly stands confessed in thy scrolls, and detaches itself from the true words. By help of tea was renounced. I went to the circus. One horse brought a basket in his teeth, picked up a cap, and selected a card out of 4. All wonder comes of showing an effect at 2 or 3 removes from the cause. Show us the 2 or 3 steps by which the horse was brought to fetch the basket, and wonders would cease. But I and Waldo were of one mind when he said, "It makes me want to go home." A pleasant walk and sail this fine afternoon with George Bradford. I threatened by way of Ernest Penny and this absorbing reform to renounce beef and the Daily Advertiser. There is ever a slight suspicion of the burlesque about earnest good men. It is very strange, but we flee to the speculative reformer to escape that same slight ridicule. I think it ought to be remembered in every essay, after the absolute criticism, that one circumstance goes to modify every work of literature, this, namely, that books are written generally by the unmagnetic class of mankind, by those who have not the active faculties, and who describe what they have never done. This circumstance must certainly color what they say of character and action. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 31, dating from the year 1840, when the author was 37 years old. In the next volume, we will pick up where we left off with the date May 28th. Thank you for listening.